All right, let's just jump right into this. If you're going through this explainer right now and you feel, well, just entirely financially exhausted despite working incredibly hard, I need you to know you are absolutely not alone. Welcome to our deep dive into what economists are now calling the Great American Squeeze. Today, we're going to look really closely at the data to unpack exactly why the middle class is struggling so deeply in modern America. And more importantly, we're going to show why that creeping feeling of constantly treading water, it's not just in your head. It is literally baked into a rapidly changing economy. So doing everything right but still falling behind? Does that hit a little too close to home? Because there are millions of people out there who look completely financially stable on the outside. You know, driving nice cars, living in decent neighborhoods, but internally they're silently living paycheck to paycheck. And look, the problem isn't that Americans suddenly got lazy or stopped working hard. Actually, scratch that. The data shows we are working way harder with way higher productivity and for longer hours than any previous generation. The harsh reality is that the economic system itself has fundamentally shifted right beneath our feet. Now, to truly understand where we are today, we first got to establish our baseline. What did the American dream actually used to look like? Historically, the traditional middle class was built by teachers, nurses, factory workers, office employees. These were folks who could comfortably afford a home, save up some money, actually take an annual family vacation, and eventually retire with dignity. And here's the absolute kicker. They often did all of this on just a single income. I mean, back in the 1970s, the median home cost roughly 2.5 times the median household income. It was pure stability. But today, a lot of those exact same essential professions just do not provide that kind of security anymore. Which brings us to Section 1, the cost of living crisis. When you look at the macro math here, the contrast between the past and our modern reality is just stark. Everything got way more expensive, way faster than incomes ever increased. So a worker today might technically earn a higher salary on paper than someone did 20 or 30 years ago, but their actual purchasing power has been completely decimated by inflation. Let's put that into perspective. A monthly rent payment that used to be a totally manageable $800 has easily surged past $2,000 in a lot of cities. A college degree that once cost maybe $10,000, yeah, that can rapidly exceed $100,000 now. Saddle in young adults with what is basically a mortgage payment before they even start their first job. Middle-class families feel poorer today because when you adjust for these exploding costs, they genuinely are.
And honestly, the biggest culprit of all is housing. Millions of Americans are now spending anywhere from 30 to 50% of their entire income just to keep a roof over their heads. You know that old financial rule of thumb, the one that said you should never spend more than 30% of your gross income on housing? Well, for vast swaths of the country, that rule is completely dead. Whether it's sky-high rent eating up a massive chunk of your paycheck or crazy home prices and interest rates locking buyers out entirely, the burden is just massive. And think about what happens after you pay for that housing. That tiny remaining slice of income has to cover groceries, gas, utilities, leaving virtually zero for investments, retirement, or unexpected emergencies. For younger folks especially, homeownership is starting to feel like a locked door.
Compounding that housing crisis is what we call the healthcare debt trap. Medical debt is a uniquely American problem, and it's actually a leading cause of bankruptcy right now. Even middle-class families with insurance are drowning in high premiums, massive deductibles, and those totally devastating surprise medical bills. And it creates this terrifying self-fulfilling cycle. People are literally more afraid of the medical bill than the actual illness. So what do? They delay treatment. Because they wait, their health problems naturally worsen over time. And because the problems worsen, the eventual medical costs become astronomically higher when they're finally forced to go to the hospital. A single unexpected emergency can wipe out a decade of careful savings in a flash. And if you're trying to raise a family through all of this, wow, the costs are just staggering. We're talking about childcare. Childcare that literally rivals a monthly mortgage payment, often hitting $10,000 to $15,000 a year per child. And then you add in school costs, extracurricular fees, out-of-pocket healthcare, surging grocery prices, essential technology for schooling, the looming, absolute suffocating pressure of college savings. It's this cascading financial panic that forces parents into impossible choices. You see one parent leaving the workforce entirely because their salary barely even covers the daycare bill, or folks taking on second jobs or just quietly drowning in debt despite both adults working exhausting full-time schedules. So how are people making up this growing difference? Let's move to Section 2, surviving on borrowed money. We have completely entered the credit card survival economy. National credit card debt recently surged past $1 trillion. $1 trillion. And the thing is, you aren't seeing luxury vacations or designer clothes driving these balances. You're seeing groceries, gas, medical bills, rent, utilities. Credit cards aren't just for discretionary spending or racking up airline miles anymore. They are the literal trapdoor of survival for families struggling month to month. As inflation acts like this hidden tax, silently eating away at your purchasing power, families are forced to use debt just to bridge the gap between their paychecks and reality. Externally, they look perfectly middle class. Internally, they are totally trapped. And this total reliance on debt, it fundamentally breaks the future, specifically retirement. Previous generations had defined benefit pensions, stable career tracks, affordable living costs. The risk of retirement was managed by the employer. But today, that burden, that entire risk, has been completely shifted onto you, the individual. You have to fund it all yourself through a 401k or an IRA. But seriously, how can you possibly save for the future when daily living expenses are consuming your entire paycheck right now? The tragic result is that many middle-class workers are now just expecting to delay retirement indefinitely, working well into their 70s out of pure financial necessity. To really grasp why all of this is happening, we have to zoom out a bit. Let's look at Section 3, the wealth and labor divide. You turn on the news and you constantly hear that the economy is strong, GDP is growing, everything is great. But economic gains are not distributed equally. In fact, since the 1970s, worker productivity has absolutely soared, but median wage growth has basically flatlined. So while the overall economy sees massive gains, stock market surging, real estate values exploding, corporate profits hitting record highs, the middle class reality is an entirely different story. We just stagnate, rent rises way faster than your pay scale, debt goes up. This huge disconnect is exactly why everyday Americans roll their eyes when pundits claim the economy is booming. The economy might be doing great, for sure, but the workers actually fueling it? They certainly aren't. The rich earn from ownership. The middle class survives through work. Let that sink in for a second. That right there is the heavy anchor concept of this entire explainer. Over the last few decades, if you owned assets like real estate, stocks, or businesses, you've benefited enormously from this economic system. But if you rely solely on your labor, meaning your hourly wage or your salary, you are at a massive structural disadvantage. Because as the cost of living rapidly outpaces wage growth, relying on labor alone is simply no longer enough to build wealth in America. And living on that treadmill, it doesn't just empty your bank account, it empties your spirit. That brings us to Section 4, the psychological toll. The financial struggle we're talking about is deeply, deeply psychological. People are absolutely exhausted from juggling multiple jobs and side hustles just to break even. They are profoundly anxious about outliving whatever meager savings they have. But what makes it uniquely punishing today is the constant bombardment of curated, flawless lifestyles on social media. Modern Americans are pushed into this endless comparison game, which just fuels lifestyle inflation. There is this immense, unspoken pressure to maintain the appearance of middle-class success to your peers, even if it means quietly accumulating crippling debt in the background to pull it off. This emotional burnout, it's spanning across entire generations right now. And this leads us to the ultimate frustration, right? The breaking of the social contract. People are doing exactly what they were told to do, and they're still struggling. You played by the rules. You took on the loans to go to school. You worked hard. You paid your taxes. You tried to save. Yet, the traditional promise of upward mobility just feels entirely broken. The deep pain so many folks feel comes from the stark realization that hard work and a good education alone simply aren't translating into the security that it guaranteed their parents. So where does this leave us? Is there a way out? Let's move to our final section, Section 5. Can the middle class recover? Look, personal financial discipline, trying to reduce unnecessary debt, building an emergency fund, that is always going to be helpful, but it is not a cure. Let's be crystal clear about this. You literally cannot out-budget a structural economic crisis. Skipping your morning coffee isn't going to fix a 500% increase in housing costs, right? Overcoming these massive pressures requires real, systemic policy changes. We're talking about higher wage growth that actually aligns with real-world inflation. We need sweeping, affordable housing solutions, aggressively lower healthcare and prescription costs, meaningful ways to handle student debt burdens, and much stronger worker protections. The rules of the global economy have changed, and the policies protecting the working class desperately need to catch up. Which leaves us with a pretty critical question to end on. Will the American dream be redefined, or is the middle class gone forever? The middle class absolutely still exists, but maintaining that lifestyle now requires a daily, full-time financial battle. Surviving today takes far more effort, strategy, and risk than ever before. We really have to ask ourselves what kind of economy we want to build next, because the old one, yeah, it's already gone. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. Keep asking questions, look a little closer at the data around you, and I'll see you next time.